I'm Roy Gutman, the president of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. On behalf of our board of trustees, a warm welcome to guests and of course to our members, and especially to our two distinguished speakers tonight. We have a very special program tonight on Myanmar, also known as Burma, a country of 54 million people in Southeast Asia. 5 years ago, the Burmese military attacked, tortured, and killed Rohingya, who are Muslims, and forced hundreds of thousands of them to flee the country. The United States declared it a genocide. Early last year, the Myanmar military staged a coup and kicked out the elected government, threw them in jail. These are the same military men who are responsible for the Rohingya genocide. Our first presenter tonight is the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Myanmar. That is, Tom Andrews watches the place like a hawk. He reports to the UN Human Rights Council, but he has to watch Myanmar from a distance. And that's because the Myanmar junta has put out an all points bulletin. Sorry about the background disturbance. The Myanmar junta has put out an all points bulletin to missions far and wide, not to give him a visa. So he's persona non grata. He's not welcome. That's actually a high compliment, I think, to his skills and his abilities. But it makes him have to work 3 times as hard. He has to assemble his very carefully written and well-documented reports the hard way. Tom is a former US Congressman from Maine, a graduate of Bowdoin. He's been interested in Myanmar since he entered Congress in 1991. Well, that was the year that the National League of Democracy, the LDP, entered the Myanmar parliament. It was led by Aung San Suu Kyi. But as he put it, I got elected to Congress, they went to prison. He was the general secretary of the campaign advocating Aung San Suu Kyi's and the people of Burma for the Nobel Peace Prize. He kept on his focus on the country during his 4 years in Congress and well beyond. He has served as special rapporteur for Myanmar since 2020, the year before the coup. Well, he must have known something was coming. He's also a senior fellow on human rights at the Yale Law School. His title tonight will be, Is the World Letting Myanmar Down? Before we begin that, let me just introduce Wai Wai Nu, who's our second speaker. Talk about a hard life. She spent 7 years as a political prisoner in Myanmar. Her crime, well, she's a member of the Rohingya minority. Her father was a political activist. She was halfway through her college when the sentence was handed down. And to her enormous credit, after prison, she went back to college. She received her bachelor's degree in law at the University of Yangon, also known as Rangoon, once known as Rangoon. And then she went to Berkeley for a master's degree. She founded the Women's Peace Network in 2013. She has become known worldwide as an advocate for equal rights and democracy, and as a fighter against political oppression and genocide. She's been named a Woman of the Year by one of the Women of the Year by the Financial Times, a Next Generation Leader by Time Magazine, and one of the 100 top world thinkers by Foreign Policy Magazine. And tonight she will speak on preventing atrocity and genocide in Myanmar. Tom, would you go first and provide the overview?
Okay, well, Roy, thank you so very much, and thank you all for the invitation to join you this evening, and thank you for being part of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. It's really important for we as citizens to be aware of and engaged in foreign policy questions. It makes such a difference in the lives of everyone. And I've noticed and I've learned from my experience as UN Special Rapporteur that the United States really does play a special role in the world and is in a position of exerting significant influence on what happens in the world. So as citizens, those of us who are citizens of the United States, it is a particular obligation, I believe, to be fully engaged in very important questions relating not only to our wallets or our national security, but principles and values that so many of us care a great deal about that can rise or fall depending upon the winds of change throughout the world. As Roy said, I am the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. I'm also, as you've heard, a recovering politician. Of course, there's always a danger of my breaking into a long political speech. And I'm not going to do that because if I were to do that, there would be a great danger that the person you really want to hear tonight, Wai Wai Nu, would have less time to speak. So I'm particularly happy to be with you tonight, but I'm even more so because Wai Wai Nu is on the panel with me. I want to tell you just a little bit about what a UN Special Rapporteur is. It's a fascinating position in that UN Special Rapporteurs were created to provide an independent voice and perspective on what's happening in the world. I do not answer to the Secretary General of the United Nations. I do not answer to the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. I'm an independent voice. I follow a basic code of conduct. I have to be straightforward and honest. If I'm going to criticize a country, I need to let them know I'm going to criticize them and give them an opportunity to respond. So basic principles of fairness. But outside of that, I'm free to say what I think needs to be said. And that provides, I think, a great advantage for the member states of the United Nations because they're getting independent perspectives and views on issues that are critically important to their meeting their responsibilities and the positions that their countries are going to be taking. It also, by the way, drives some of them to distraction because very often, if you happen to have seen any of my appearances on television broadcasts, you'll often see my name and you'll see United Nations underneath it, which for many, it appears as if I am speaking on behalf of the United Nations, the Secretary General, the High Commissioner, which of course I'm not. I'm speaking independently. But with that caveat, I think this independent system has worked out extremely well. My constituents, in other words, in my view, is not the United Nations. It's not the member states of the United Nations. It's not the Human Rights Council. It's the people of Myanmar who are up against an extraordinary, ruthless, brutal regime that they are standing up against with extraordinary tenacity and courage. It is my responsibility to present the facts of the crisis that's ongoing in Myanmar right now to the United Nations, to present an analysis of those facts, and to present recommendations as to what I think the United Nations should be doing. The brutal fact of the matter is, with respect to human rights, far too many people, for far too long, for them, Myanmar human rights has been for many, many years an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. And no one can speak to that more powerfully or forcefully or personally than Wai Wai Nu in terms of what that has meant for the Rohingya ethnic minority and what it has meant for other ethnic minorities as well throughout the country. Now, as Roy mentioned, last year on February 1st, the military leader of Myanmar, Min Aung Hlaing, the senior general, launched a coup against the government of Myanmar. And they launched with it a campaign of terror and brutality against anyone who was willing to stand up and fight for decency, for democracy, fight to oppose this illegal coup d'etat. Since that day, and since that occurred in February of last year, more than 2,200 civilians have been killed as part of this systematic military crackdown throughout the country. That is at least, it's a very modest figure. I think if you can look at those who have been involved in various ways in the struggle, including those who have taken up arms, the loss of life among the democracy forces, the opposition forces challenging and taking on the military junta are significantly larger than that. They have killed hundreds, that is the military of Myanmar, under the direction of the junta, have killed hundreds of civilians in the shelling of heavy artillery and airstrikes by helicopters, by fighter jets. It has frequently bombed camps for internally displaced persons. It has attacked those very shelters that were constructed to protect those people who were literally running for their lives after their homes and villages had been destroyed by the junta. One of the great honors for me has been the opportunity to meet and speak with so many people throughout the country who are facing this brutality with such courage every single day. And I'll never forget speaking to a man, a father, who at great risk went to a location where he could speak with me on a satellite phone because he had something very important to tell me. And we got the connection working. And he told me that his village had been destroyed, his house had been burned to the ground. He took his family, his wife and his two daughters, ages 12 and 15, to a center so that they could have protection with others who had also lost their homes and their villages. And he told me that two nights before we spoke, his two daughters were killed in an airstrike by the military junta against that center that was supposedly a safe zone, a place where they could seek security and safety. Hundreds of members of the opposition National League for Democracy have been incarcerated. There are thousands of people who are wanted, thousands who have been arrested for their political beliefs. 61 children are now being held, not because of anything that those children did, but because they are being used as hostages, as a means of getting their parents, who are part of the opposition movement leadership, to turn themselves in. There is a growing humanitarian crisis in Myanmar that has become catastrophic. The number of internally displaced persons now exceeds 1.3 million people. More than 1 million people have been displaced since the coup. And the assault on people's lives, the ability of them to basically make a living, has thrown over half of the country of Myanmar into poverty. So this is a catastrophe of incredible proportions, both in terms of the assaults on the leadership, assaults on regular people seeking to make a living, assaults on those who were involved in the campaign for human rights and dignity in Myanmar, and in terms of a great humanitarian catastrophe that has spread throughout the country. It is critically important that those who are on the front lines and have showed such courage and tenacity have the support of the international community. And to answer the question that Roy put to me, is the world letting the people of Myanmar down? The short answer to that question is yes. There has not been the requisite attention to this crisis. There has not been the requisite action to address this crisis. The humanitarian crisis, just as an example, only a small fraction of the humanitarian relief fund that's been established by the United Nations to address the humanitarian concerns have been filled. There has not been an emergency session of the Security Council to address not only this crisis, but also the need for humanitarian access so we can get food and medicine and supplies into areas that desperately need it. Those countries, including the United States, who have stood up in support of the people of Myanmar and opposing this brutal military junta, has yet to fully engage the tools that are available to them to challenge this military junta. I'm talking about economic sanctions. I'm talking about preventing weapons from getting into the hands of the junta. I'm talking about cutting off revenue sources. What actions have been taken by some countries, including the United States, have been done on a piecemeal basis. They haven't been focused. They haven't been coordinated. They haven't been strategic so that they could address the key vulnerabilities of the junta, so that working together, the various collective actions of these nations could work together as a coherent whole and have a chance to make significant change in that country and force this junta to understand that what it is doing is simply not sustainable. So we have a huge challenge in front of us. There are huge options that have yet to be exercised by the United States and others. And it's up to us, all of us, as citizens of the world, who care about human rights and dignity, who care about the enormous suffering going on in places like Myanmar, to stand up and have our voices be heard in the halls of Congress with decision makers and editorial boards in every way possible, to have our voices be heard on behalf of those who are facing such incredible, incredible challenges. None more than the people of Myanmar. So for the opportunity to come and join you this evening, for the great opportunity to join my my good friend Wai Wai Nu, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. So let's go to Wai Wai, please.
Thank you very much, Roy, for this opportunity to join you today. And it's always an honor to join Special Rapporteur Tom Andrews. He's a great resources and well respected by our community, the Rohingya, as well as people of Myanmar. And I've known him for a long time, ever since I become an activist, and have been able to learn from him so much, and from his wisdom and from his campaign and all of this, even before he became a special rapporteur on human rights situations in Myanmar at the United Nations. So since Tom has covered a lot of the overall situations today, as well as highlighted some of the great points and international response in relation to the international responses, I thought it might be useful for me to really give a little bit of background and what happened to the Rohingya, who are the Rohingya, and the role of military in Myanmar. When we talk about the ongoing atrocities in Myanmar or Rohingya genocide, one of the key actors come across is the military. So I think it might be helpful to understand the role of militaries in Myanmar. So as many of you may know, Burmese military was actually established in 1941 with the objective to fight for their independence. And we've gained independence in 1948, and the military at that time, Burmese army, was regarded as a hero of the country and well respected and reputable institutions for the country as a whole. However, in 1962, one of the independent heroes, let's say, General Ne Win, he was part of the independence movement. He staged a coup and ruled the country with socialism, and it's become effectively a dictatorship. And we have a student uprising and revolutions in 1974 and 1988, and the General Ne Win regime had to step down, and we had a first elections in 1990, but then the new second generations of the military leaders staged a coup again and ruled the country until 2011, when we have this so-called political democracy transitions, which was facilitated by the military dictators under the 2008 constitutions enacted by the military themselves. The militaries play a key role, very important role in Burmese politics, as well as in all the atrocities in the history and ongoing atrocities. So unlike military institution in the US and many Western countries, the military institutions in Myanmar is not that popular among the public, but hated because of their abuses and atrocities against the different ethnic communities, as well as civilian in Burma as a whole, political dissidents and human rights defenders, and anybody who ever speak up for anything throughout the history and till today, as Tom described. Militaries having an important role in politics, as well as being able to control the country for so long. They have created so many preconditions for the genocide and ongoing atrocity crimes in Myanmar. The militaries has systematically introduced Burmese Buddhist supremacy in Burma, as well as introduce the tactics of Burmanizations. Basically, as they promote Burmese Buddhist populations as a superior class of the society, they have also the tactic of erasure against their other religious and ethnic identities in Myanmar, suppressing all of the other Christians, Muslims, and Hindus identities, as well as targeting ethnic communities, and by erasing their culture, their history, their ethnic identity, and so on. At the same time, they have introduced divide and rule tactics among the different ethnic communities that has also created deep divisions between the ethnic communities. So there are a fundamental inter-ethnic distrust and divisions happening. And at the same time, they specifically target the minority, the Muslim groups over the past several decades, ever since 9/11 happened here, and even prior to that. Since the 9/11, everything that we see in the international news or in school, it's all about Muslims being terrorists and threat to the Buddhism and for the country. So a lot of the Islamophobic propaganda and campaigns were ongoing even before 2011. And after 2011, the military has used these preconditions and their role to basically promote themselves among the people, to gain popularity among the public. Specifically in 2012, when Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, opposition democratic leaders, was released and entered by-elections, and when she and her party won landslide during the by-elections, military has actually effectively introduced genocidal campaigns against the Rohingya, creating a communal violence in 2012. And ever since the communal violence, so-called communal violence, they framed it as a communal violence. Ever since it has started, there were so many other activities ongoing in Rakhine State, where in Rakhine State, Rohingya are prohibited from traveling from one village to another village, or going to school, or doing any businesses, or requiring people permissions or authorization to get married, limiting the Rohingyas' birth, and all of the genocidal tactics were there and have exacerbated. At the same time, military has actually used Facebook, social media, and publications and state media to promote existing propagandas and turn it towards the Rohingya as an immediate threat to their country and to the people, especially the Buddhist people. And that violence and hate and propaganda has escalated from the 2012 to 2017, when a massive violence attack against the Rohingya occurred under the name of clearance operations. That led almost 1 million people to flee from their home within a 2-month period in August and September, and killed thousands, and used these sexual violence and gender-based violence as a massive scales of sexual and gender-based violence and mutilations to terrorize the people, and that has led to creations of one of the largest refugee crises in the world until recently, and until the Ukraine happened, I guess. And now that about 1 million Rohingyas are living in squalid refugee camps. The point here is that these are the background, but there were early warnings when we talk about atrocity preventions happening over the past several decades, but the international community has done very little to nothing and did not prevent this preventable human catastrophe. Because there was no accountability for the past crimes, and military has been enjoying this impunity for several decades, and it has been, the institution has emboldened to take a further steps and stage the coup. And now that we have crimes against humanity and war crimes happening at the every day, as Special Rapporteur has already described, and Rohingya remain a great danger of recurrence of atrocity crimes in Rakhine State and with the ongoing genocide. So how do we prevent? I'm sure many of you know there is a principle called responsibility to protect. We often refer to. It was adopted in 2005 after the genocide in Rwanda and Serbia, with the promise of never again, and to prevent this atrocity crimes such as genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. There are three pillars for this principle. One, each state have responsibility to protect its populations. For the second pillar, international community should assist the state to protect its populations. Once the state failed to protect the populations, then international community has the responsibility to protect the populations across the world. And now the case of Myanmar is beyond the second pillar. So the entire responsibility now lies on the international community. Like I said, they didn't do anything. Especially when I say international community, it's a member state, it's a UN Security Council, it's UN General Assembly, and the rest of the international community, whoever feel responsible for, but specifically talking about the member states, the countries. A lot of people say these frameworks are not working and people are not supportive of it. The country, the states are not. But in the case of Ukraine, we have actually seen that if there's a political will, it is actually effective, and they can actually implement all of the promises under the responsibility to protect. For this case of Ukraine, the countries has come together to take actions at the ICC or at the ICJ, as well as put in sanctions against Russia and many other actions. Although a lot can be done for the Ukraine, but we also need the similar support for the other atrocity crimes, such as in Myanmar. We have not seen such a coordinated effort for the Burma yet. There are ongoing statements by the government and UN. So far, a lot of those are not very effective. But after the military coup 2021, the US, the UK, EU, European Union, and Canada, and a few others has taken some sanctions, but they are not being that effective because they're not comprehensive or they're not coordinated among the different states. So now we're calling for a more comprehensive and coordinated sanctions against the military. This is what they have done. And then UN Security Council has actually conducted a few meetings and issued press statement and presidential statement. Although the Rohingya face genocide, as Tom mentioned, the US has actually made determinations this year, March. Although we have ongoing atrocity crimes, for the case of Myanmar, the seriousness of the situations is there. All atrocities are happening every day, but the UN Security Council, up to today, there is no effective actions by the UN Security Council. There is not a single resolution at the UN Security Council in the case of Myanmar. Whereas for the Ukraine, it can happen immediately after after the war broke. And then a lot of the international population communities has been relying on the ASEAN and assuming that ASEAN can bring a solution to Myanmar. ASEAN has actually come up with the 5 points consensus with the military to bring about some change, but these 5 points consensus are not being implemented. So these are on the current responses. However, a lot need to be done besides international, I guess, states. Although the country like US hasn't stand up for the Rohingya and for the people of Myanmar effectively or substantially, there has been some progress or development happen over the past several years that include the United Nations investigative mechanisms on Myanmar following United Nations fact-finding missions on Myanmar in 2018. So now we have this UN independent investigative mechanisms, and as well as we have an investigations led by the International Criminal Court for the crimes of deportations of the Rohingya to the Bangladesh, which is a very limited jurisdictions. And that investigation was initiated by the prosecutor office of the International Criminal Court. And we also have a small country, Gambia, initiated a case before the International Court of Justice on the violations of Genocide Convention. And we have a universal jurisdiction case in Argentina, as well as there are some universal jurisdiction case after the coup is happening in Australia, in Turkey, and the last one might be in Indonesia. So there are some development happening. Although all of the point here is that these are not initiated by the country like the US, which is supposed to be moral leader in this world and supposed to be protecting human rights and democracy. The US hasn't actually taken this effective stance for the Rohingya people of Myanmar. So to conclude, what can we do? The greater risks of further atrocity crimes is there. And perpetrators are still the very same military who committed all these past crimes are still committing all of ongoing crimes. And still there is not enough adequate international responses, and we need more coordinated and comprehensive response led by the United States, US government. We need the US support. So that's international responses. We need stronger international responses. At the same time, we really need commitment from the international community for accountability and justice. There are support for the ongoing justice processes is essential. At the same time, exploring further comprehensive accountability mechanisms, including referral of the situations of Myanmar to the ICC at the UN Security Council, or creation of an ad hoc tribunal at the UN General Assembly, so that the crimes that committed by the military can be prosecuted in a holistic manner. Lastly, we need urgent protection for the people of Myanmar and human rights defenders and civil society organizations, as well as the Rohingya. So there should be a short-term and longer-term strategy to provide protections, as well as support, longer-term support for the affected communities, civil society organizations, and the human rights defenders. That's all for now, and I'll be really happy to take part in the Q&A sessions, if you may.
Well, thank you both for those excellent presentations, which really complemented each other in a way I hadn't quite expected, but they were totally on the same track. I have some good questions that have come in from a member named Arnold Sherman. How do you explain the level of brutality by those in power? And how do they reconcile Buddhism with such brutal repression? Could either of you take on that question?
Let me take the second part because it was a very interesting comment that was made by the Prime Minister of Cambodia, Hun Sen, who is the chair now. There's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations have a revolving chair. So each year a new country becomes the chair. Cambodia is the present chair, and one of the latest atrocities was the killing of some democracy activists, including a former member of the parliament, a National League for Democracy member of parliament. They were executed. There are 82 people now on death row. The prison conditions are just horrific. And the junta announced that they were going to begin the execution of political prisoners. And Hun Sen made a very personal appeal on the basis of Buddhism, Cambodia being a Theravadan Buddhist country, appealing to Min Aung Hlaing and the leadership of Myanmar on the basis of Buddhist principles, not to go forward with these killings. And of course, back a month ago, these executions took place, and now we are fearing for the lives of those who remain on death row. I'm going to let Wai Wai talk about the first part, but let me just say that I think part of the dynamic here in Myanmar is we have to understand that, and from all of my knowledge and all of my conversations and everything I know about Myanmar, it is very clear to me that the military junta is reviled by the vast majority of the people of Myanmar throughout the country. So their only hope of trying to secure any kind of semblance of power would be to terrorize people. In other words, these very highly public executions of very highly public leaders is perhaps a message to everyone in the country. You may not like us, but if you step out of line and you engage in this opposition, then you too could find yourself facing execution. The former ambassador from the United Kingdom to Myanmar was arrested and is now in prison. She was arrested a few weeks ago, found guilty, and is now in prison. Again, the message is, if we are willing to incarcerate a former ambassador from the United Kingdom, what do you think we're going to be willing to do to you? So I think it's part of desperation on the part of the junta, given the fact that all around them, they're finding a very strong, widespread, and very deep opposition.
Wai Wai, do you want to add something to that?
Yes, just quickly about the Buddhism. So military institution is the biggest, largest institutions in Myanmar with about 600,000 soldiers, military personnel. So, and following that institution, the Sangha institution, Buddhist institution, Buddhist monastic institution is a second biggest. And throughout these militaries, propaganda and promotions of Buddhist Burman supremacism, somehow military is able to convince a lot of the Buddhist leaders, Buddhist Sanghas, to become supporter of the military institutions, to be loyal to the military institution. Otherwise, they don't get promotions or space in the religious leadership's space. So that's how the military has been utilizing the religious institution for their interests and for their power, to be able to control their power. They understand that they have to use Buddhism and they have to have support, support from the Buddhist leaders, and that's how they have been. They are managed to keep themselves alive for so long. But it doesn't mean all the Buddhist leaders support the military. It has already been witnessed in 2007 Saffron Revolution, where Buddhist leaders, Buddhist Sanghas went out on the street and protest against them. And that's when you can also see the military is actually not religious or doesn't follow Buddhist principles. They actually killed the Sanghas, killed the Buddhist leaders at that time and imprisoned many of them. So basically, they're using Buddhism for their own benefit or for their own interest and power. And not necessarily that they respect and they really believed in promotions of this Buddhism. But they utilize it for their own sake. As I said, militarism has been able to become one of the most or strongest institutions in Myanmar, and they actually been not only able to grow themselves as a military institution, but also being able to control not only politics, but also entire economy. So they are a very small percentage of the populations in Myanmar, a class in Myanmar, which has control over the power and economy, and they are interconnected among each other. So for them, keeping power means keeping their businesses as well. So that's why we are insistent, we are pushing for the economic sanctions against the militaries and its businesses, because they control majority of the country's business. And for them, it's become it's losing everything or having nothing. There were attempts to compromise during the compromise their situations, like giving military some space so that they can step back since 2011 to 2012, 2021 until they stage a coup. But it seems like they don't feel enough to have to share some power. They want absolute control over the politics as well as over the economy. And that's how their mentality and attitude has become with the impunity, because they feel like they can do it, right? But their interest is both business as well as the political power.
So, well, thank you very much. Michael Connolly has a question, which actually was going to be my question as well, which is what is the view or what has been the response of some of the major powers in the area? India, China, and Russia. And I think I have to add Serbia, because I know that Serbia has actually been sending some weapons, I understand.
In addition to my regular reports, every time the Human Rights Council meets, I address them. I will be speaking to the UN General Assembly in New York in October. But in addition to that, I decided that, look, it's important for us to dig a little deeper into some of these issues and present special reports on some of these questions, including what you've just alluded to. So one of those reports, my first such report, which was published early this year, was on how the junta is able to obtain the lethal weapons that it is using to attack villages large and small across Myanmar. Gunships, large artillery munitions, jets, fighter jets, and we looked at what member states, the role of member states in providing these weapons. We classified them, and the first classification was those countries willing to provide the junta with these weapons since the coup. In other words, since we all know since the coup how these weapons are being used, the worst classification, what we decided would be the greatest offenders from a human rights perspective, were those countries willing to sell or otherwise transfer weapons to Myanmar since the coup. The three were Russia, China, and as you mentioned, Roy, Serbia. Now, the interesting thing about Serbia, I was criticized roundly by Serbia for focusing on them, for adding them into that list. We conducted very, very strong research. Whenever we do our research papers, we present all of our findings to the country before we publish it. We say, if we have it wrong, please let us know. If there's additional information or context that we should provide, please let us know, and we'll do that. And Serbia was just very apoplectic that we would do this report at all, that we would be mentioning them in that category, but talking about the proliferation of weapons and who's behind it. So I was criticized before the Human Rights Council. Interestingly enough, the Serbian government has subsequently announced that they are no longer authorizing the transfer of weapons to the junta of Myanmar. So that was, in my view, a win. But countries have taken various positions on how they're going to respond to the junta, some by supporting them in many ways, including with weapons, some by opposing them in various ways, including sanctions, arms embargoes, diplomatic pressure. But as Wai Wai referred to, I think what we're looking for and what many in Myanmar are hoping for is that there will be a stronger, tougher, clearer, more strategic and coordinated response by the members of the international community who want to put maximum pressure, economic, diplomatic pressure on the junta. And that is the goal of many advocates, human rights advocates throughout the world who are very, very active, as Wai Wai is, in trying to advocate for human rights in the United Nations.
And who is preventing a UN Security Council resolution and the emergency debate that should be held?
It took 4 days for a resolution on Ukraine to be introduced and debated before the Human Rights Council. Now, what they'll say is, look, why should we put a resolution before the Human Rights Council? We know it's going to be vetoed. We know it's going to be vetoed. So why go about this? And those who could put one on the floor of the Security Council, that is largely the argument. Well, the answer with respect to Ukraine is that, okay, it was vetoed, but there was a full and open debate. Countries had to stand up and be counted on their positions. And once that debate was over, even though the resolution was vetoed, it went before the General Assembly in an emergency special session. And it was one of the catalysts for the mobilization of opposition throughout the world. So many are saying, if what can happen in 4 days with respect to Ukraine, why has it taken more than a year and a half for it to be considered with respect to the crisis in Myanmar?
Is the U.S. making, the United States, are we making special provisions for Myanmar, for Burmese, as we've made special provisions for Ukrainians in an instant?
I think a lot of the Burmese refugees are not considered as refugees in neighboring countries, including Bangladesh and Thailand and India and elsewhere. Many are considered as illegal migrant or illegal immigrant, or in the case of Bangladesh, they are just considered as what is the exact term? Residents of Myanmar who are forced to flee from home. So basically, they're not protected as refugees in many countries. For the U.S., there were, I think, about a year or so since the coup has begun, the U.S. administration has allowed people to come to the U.S. under the humanitarian parole. So I think a few hundred Burmese political activists came to the U.S. with that program. And then the refugee resettlement program for the certain people, very small number of people, has begun. It's again also just a couple of hundred people, not a lot of people. I think there are some thousands people are waiting in Thailand to be able to resettle to the US and other countries. But unlike Ukraine and Afghanistan, refugees from the Ukraine and Afghanistan, Burmese refugee does not receive any special, special favor, or I don't know how to say it, apart from this small number of people being relocated to the US. But again, for the Ukrainian, I think there are some flexibility and relaxations of the bureaucratic procedures for asylum, taking asylums, or having some other dealing with some other issues in the US for Burmese refugees and people who came for the with the humanitarian parole. There aren't any of this. I mean, especially with the people with a humanitarian parole status, doesn't have any assistance or on those things to navigate their life here, including applying work permit, to applying asylum, etc. So yeah, we definitely feel a bit abandoned and unsupported. So I think there should be a lot more support for the people. I saw there was a questions around different nature of the crisis. Of course, yes, the Ukrainian situations and Myanmar situations, the fundamental nature of the crisis are different, but the suffering, the crimes, the international crimes that are occurring in both places are similar. That's what the international community is responsible for to protect. To the crimes, the genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes, these are happening in both contexts as well as other places, and all of these crimes should be considered equal in terms of responses and protection.
In Ukraine, you really have a united country and a united government, of course. It's so much easier when you have a government like that. Whereas in Burma or in Myanmar, you are so separated into so many different groups. Is there no way for the opposition to unite and have more impact?
I've been amazed at just how much Mina lying in this coup has brought unity to many people. And I've had several conversations. Wai Wai talked about the Burma majority who just didn't believe it when they heard the stories of the genocidal attacks against the Rohingya or the attacks against other ethnic minorities and the conflicts that were going on. They just didn't believe that the military would be capable of committing these atrocities, so they didn't believe it. Some of them have publicly apologized for not believing, and they have come to the very clear, unmistakable conclusion that there is a common foe here, that everyone in Myanmar, regardless of what ethnic background they're from, what religion they have, that this common foe is this military junta and those forces that it commands and are still loyal to them. Now, we've seen interesting incidences, growing incidences of members of the military giving up their posts, switching sides, working and supporting the opposition. But what I've seen from my experience is that it's a very good point. Myanmar is a very diverse country, made up of many ethnic groups that speak many different languages. It's a remarkable country. And to have any kind of unity around anything is a major challenge. But the silver lining behind this cloud is that there has been incredible unity in coalescing opposition to this military.
Well, one more question from Arnold Sherman, and we're nearing the end tonight, which is how can we create a new international mechanism without the problems of the UN? I happen to think that what you've said tonight, Tom, actually shows the UN working somewhat in that you're able to do your job and put the facts before the public, but then it's not working on the other hand at the government level because somebody's blocking every effort made in the Human Rights Council and obviously at the Security Council. So is there some other mechanism out there that we should be thinking about?
I think that what we have to do is use the various mechanisms afforded to us by the United Nations, the Human Rights Council, the Security Council, the General Assembly, as a way to raise these issues, focus on these issues, get the truth out before the nations of the world, and demand that they take action, some action, and be held accountable for it. But in light of the structural obstacles, like the veto that mechanism before the Security Council, what it requires is that we be creative and establish a coordinated mechanism that complements but is outside the formal mechanism of the United Nations, so that those countries willing, and we know that there are dozens of countries willing to impose economic sanctions, willing to establish embargoes of weapons and dual-use technology. We know they're there. They've given voice to the people of Myanmar in opposition to the junta. The challenge is getting them together in a coordinated way so that their actions can work together and can be focused on and have a common targets that are based on an analysis of where those sanctions, where those actions can do the most good. That is what I think is required. It takes a lot more to organize something like this than not. But I think the dividends of such an action would be tremendous.
Is there some kind of institution that they could attach to that exists now, or do you have to invent a new one?
Well, I think there can be caucuses. There are various caucuses within the UN system, various coalitions and networks currently, including networks of countries that support, I brief, a number of countries that seek information and more in-depth analysis of the situation in Myanmar. So those mechanisms are there. It's just a matter of employing them for the very specific purpose of building a solid, coordinated international campaign to weaken the junta.
And what do you do about a country like India, which is, we haven't actually said what they're doing. Maybe you could just give us a very brief account of what role they're playing, because they are a major player in that region now, and they're going to be a bigger one as time goes on.
Well, all the countries that border Myanmar have a great deal at stake. And it is against all of their interests to see this catastrophe get even worse and for a major implosion of this country and a major flare-up of even more violence than exists right now. I can't speak specifically to countries unless I tell them in advance that I'm going to. But I can say that I think that there's a lot more that can be done. And that no one has more of an interest to doing so than those who are neighboring countries.
Wai Wai, do you want to make some concluding remark?
I think India and China play a critical role besides Russia in supporting the military. I mean, India is named as a democratic country, one of the longest democracy, but the recent administrations and government has been extremely problematic for within their own country, promoting a lot of the hate and prejudice, Islamophobia, and using exclusionary tactics against the different populations. And now, actually, it seems like India has learned from Burmese military using social media effectively to promote hate campaigns. And these are extremely concerning situations next door in such a big, huge country. So that's what's happening, despite of what's happening in India. The recent government has been, Modi government has been providing support to the military in many, many ways, blocking any human rights investigations or discussions in the UN. And so for us, it's a red flag how even, under the name of democracy, certain regime can be can provide support to the genocidal criminals, and actually that's not new, right? It has happened in the history, and it's continued to happen. We are very unfortunate to have such two big countries next door and not having enough support for the people for the sake of the people of Myanmar. So we cannot rely on these countries, although we are trying to have some support from the ASEAN countries. But again, everybody knows ASEAN is fundamentally a weak organization when it comes to human rights. Although there are some member states who are strong, like, for example, Malaysia, perhaps Indonesia, and a few others are past like individually providing support, but as an ASEAN, as an institution, it is extremely ineffective and not very reliable. Yet, we are still, trying to get some support from the ASEAN countries. So, yeah, but besides, how can it be effective? Yes, I think it's not the problem of the United Nations, it's the problem of the member states, especially the Western countries, the political will of the Western countries. At this point, there are ways that the United Nations bodies can be, or mechanisms or caucuses can be strengthened to become effective once the Western countries, including US, is more committed to really preventing atrocity crimes across the world. In the case of Ukraine, it is a lot of the countries has come together and supported the Ukraine. For me, it seems to me they have been doing it for their national interest, not necessarily because they are protecting Ukrainian people, but rather for the sake of national interest. For us, I think there should be seen atrocities, crimes in the world, around the world, over and over. I think there should be a stronger movement within among the governments to really have come up with a common ground and really come up with an actions plan and promises how they can. There are principles and framework available for them to use, as well as the promises they make, but how do you actually implement? How do you take actions? So I think there need to be a more open discussions around it. States, dedicated states need to come together and mobilize people to really use these tools and principles and promises to action so that we can prevent people around the world equally, not just to the countries or for the people who they have political national interests.
Well, thank you. I think we'll close it on that note, but I want to thank both of you for really superb presentations that not only raise our interest and our concern, but also you've suggested ways that that our concern might be channeled, and if there isn't enough, and there isn't enough concern in the world right now, I hope that our discussion has added a little bit to public knowledge. It was superb. Thank you so much, Wai Wai. Thank you so much, Tom.